Okay, so good late afternoon. My name is Jennifer Villagarcia. I'm the Global Medical Engagement Strategy and Content Lead at Sanofi Vaccines.
And very warm welcome from my side as well to the overall survival group. I would mention this. Not progression-free, I'm not certain, but for the overall survival group. My name is Goran Martinovic from Boehringer Ingelheim, Global Medical Affairs. And I think we would like to discuss with you a topic which is heavily discussed over the decade already. So that would mean that most probably we didn't solve it still. In this respect, and wanting to be really customer-centric, even though there is just a few customers, so like a rare disease, let me maybe ask you to shout up one or two opinions or thoughts. What would you like to hear today? Or is there any main concern when we are talking about the impact, metrics? What would be top of your mind? Just shout it up. You do not need the microphone. Or you need? Okay, outcome metrics versus output. It's a good one. Sorry? Okay, patient outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got like 17 minutes. We are extending, so there is no party today for you guys. No, I'm joking. So what we are planning to incorporate those two topics as well. We would like to address how we are defining what impact we would like to measure and how we are measuring. Then we would like to see how we are diversifying those metrics, which we are measuring, and what you need to consider, what we need to consider when we are displaying those metrics. And we would like to share with you just a couple of examples. Now, we've heard this morning several very nice analogies. So let us start with the analogy to the team sport. And we are in Croatia, so that's the region which is very well known for basketball. So let's start with the basketball. And in every team game or team sport, you have players who are maybe specialized or dedicated to the certain function. You have the best scorer. It's very easy to measure his efficiency. You have the best rebounder, you have maybe the best defender, and so on. But then there is a role which is all over the place for all over the time. It's a playmaker. And this is something which is always very difficult to be measured, how the playmaker is actually dealing with the game. So if I'm now coming back to the pharmaceutical industry and us as a companies, we are actually team sport. We are doing this as a one team, and that we've heard a lot about cross-functionality and so on. And if we are taking the same analogy, you can say, okay, clinical development, it's relatively clear what is their impact. Execution of clinical trials. If you are looking into the market access, having proper reimbursement, proper price in the time, that's pretty much straightforward. Sales teams have very clear guidelines. However, medical affairs and medical are involved in all sequences. And then almost not owning one single measurement or metric, however, they're co-creating, collaborating, co-leading on almost all of the steps. And that's where the challenge actually starts being. Now, if you're looking this involvement in all of the stages of the game, you can see as well the very early clinical development, and that's how we will be as well showing you a couple of examples on the potential metrics. So metrics within the clinical development early phase, and we are seeing, especially in the rare diseases, that medical affairs starting being involved earlier and earlier, so -2, -3, even -4 years before launch, then pre-launch, and then, of course, launch and post-launch phase.
So you see that medical has impact all throughout the life cycle of a product. But in order to show that impact, you need metrics. And we've been talking a lot about metrics today, even in some of the other sessions. I think one of the risks of collecting metrics is that you collect too many metrics, and it's a little bit meaningless, and it's hard to decipher what does it all mean. So here's an example of a cartoon where you have two colleagues who are saying, look, we've got all these metrics, and we can track our KPIs now. And the woman says, what's that one at the bottom right that's trending to 0? So, well, that's the one that tells us how much we understand our metrics. So that's a little bit of a trap, that sometimes we collect metrics to collect metrics. We can have our fancy dashboard, but it has to be meaningful so that it guides you in terms of what it is you're trying to achieve. So what I'm going to show you now is a couple of tips on when you're thinking about collecting metrics, how do you ensure that those metrics matter and create value for you? So one of the first, let's say, tips is make sure that the metrics are aligned to your strategy. Now, that sounds a little obvious, when we're standing up here, but essentially just make sure that your strategy is your North Star, and everything that you're collecting is giving you guidance towards how well you're implementing that strategy, how well you're moving the needle towards that strategy. If you realize you're collecting some metric that has nothing to do with the strategy, drop it, clean up your dashboard, and then you have much more visibility on what it is you're trying to achieve. The second is to have a tailored approach. Some people might be coming to this session saying, oh, great, when I leave here, I'm going to have 5 metrics I can implement on Monday. And that's not exactly true. Some of them definitely, but it depends on your industry. It depends on your strategy. Industry meaning if you're working more towards rare disease, if you're more in primary care, the metrics will be vastly different. It also depends on where you are in the life cycle, what we just showed earlier. If you're in the or in the clinical phase or in launch phase, the metrics are going to be vastly different. So it's okay to have a tailored approach and that not everyone has the same metrics and you adapt it according to your strategy and what you want to achieve. The third is about stakeholder relevance. When we talk about impact in medical, the idea is about impact to who? What are we trying to achieve? Think about the impact we want to achieve on our stakeholders. Your stakeholders might be patients, they might be HCPs, they might be experts, scientific experts, researchers. What's important to them and how can we have impact towards them and then measure that? That's what's going to show you the value that you're bringing. And don't just consider stakeholders that are external, but stakeholders who are internal. For example, medical works very closely with marketing, with market access, R&D. They're depending on us to have a certain impact internally so that they can take the ball and then make the shot. Yeah. So to what extent are we having impact towards them? Consider even measuring those internal metrics in terms of your impact. The next point is on diverse perspectives. Already we've got quite a diverse perspectives with tailored approach, different stakeholders, but diversify your metrics. I've seen some things where we've said, we did a symposium, we did a survey at the end, it's done. Like, no, you have to go further than that and get more metrics. Internal metrics, external metrics, quantitative, qualitative, and then there's the point about the impact metrics. Of course, you can do output metrics such as how many people attended the event. That's definitely an interesting metric to have, but not only that, you want to see what happened after the event. What did they do with that information? What was the learnings? What was the mindset shift? So definitely consider diverse perspectives. And the last point is on the dashboard, to avoid having that very busy dashboard at the end that nobody knows how to read. So we're spending all this time and energy to collect it, and nobody knows what it means, especially senior management. So think about it even in your own dashboard. When you're driving your car, there's certain metrics that you look at quite frequently, such as your velocity or your fuel, and that's something that's like right front and center, and it's very clear to understand. Whereas there's other metrics on your dashboard, such as engine temperature or tire pressure, that you only need to know about when the light comes on, when there's a problem. So even consider when you're developing your dashboard, especially if it's destination for the senior management, about what do they need to know, like right front and center, and what is other things that we're just monitoring to see when there's a problem. So these are like 5 tips, just to give you some general context of what you should be considering to have metrics that matter. So right now, this is still a little bit conceptual. So we wanted to have a little bit of concrete things for you guys to take home at the end of the day. So now we're going to go to some concrete examples of how medical can measure impact at the different phases of the life cycle.
So let's start with the earliest phase, so this development phase, so -3, 4, 5 years, and taking into account what you said, how you can see impact on patients and how you can see more outcome versus output. So when we are looking in this early phase, one of the very few functions in our companies are medical affairs who are engaging with a wide range of stakeholders in such early phase. So we are engaging with the payers, we are engaging with patient organizations, with HCPs, investigators, and so on. And out of this engagement, there is a lot of really critical insights which we are gathering and which are critical for the strategy of the development as well for the strategy for the marketing as well. So we can really think as like outcome-driven metrics to have how many of critical insights have been really driving the strategy, how many of insights have actually been implemented in clinical protocols, so that studies are much more feasible. The next one is, of course, linked to the clinical trials itself. All of our companies more and more are completely outsourcing the clinical trials to the external CROs. And as such, there is a gap in the contact with the investigators, mostly experts as well, and the organizations which owns the substance and which knows a lot about it. So this gap is indirectly impacting the quality and the velocity of the clinical trials. So if you are deploying medical affairs in this early phase, supporting investigators with the scientific information and so on, you will be certainly improving those metrics. Time to recruitment completion, dropout rate, screening failure, and so on. And if you say, well, that's very difficult to say, oh, medical contributed to this, mostly you are not engaging medical affairs in all of your trials. So internally, you can have a double-blind study. So the trials with the same metrics without and trials with medical affairs contribution. And then you can compare and you can have a very nice line of how medicals improved to those executional points.
Thank you. So the next phase that we wanted to talk about is in that pre-launch phase. And that's the phase where medical is heavily involved and we're doing a lot of medical education. And the impact we want to have is on that increase of awareness on the disease or the mode of action of a new therapy. And we can definitely measure that in the different stakeholders, in the KOLs, in the patient societies, in HCPs, by various measures, market research. It can be an independent market research. It could be, if this was a medical education seminar, at the end of the event, there's a survey, and we try to understand to what extent they've learned something new and their education is moving across the spectrum. But even the MSLs that are on the ground, when they're discussing with their KOLs, they know most definitely, are they at level 1 of understanding or more at level 5 of understanding? And they can even be a source of information in terms of how well is the awareness or the understanding of these therapeutic areas being understood by the medical community. The second thing during pre-launch where we can have impact is in early access, in, for example, compassionate use programs. And so this is where drugs or therapies are available to certain populations before it's licensed because the therapy is so critical to those patients that they have access early to them. And this is where we can show the impact already to patient outcomes, the reach in those compassionate use programs. So not only is it an indicator of the impact that you're having already on patients, but it's also setting up a base of patients that you already have within the market. So then when you launch, you can build on that and grow on that.
And now we are coming to the most exciting phase, so launch phase. Everybody's exciting. You have a very nice venue. Everybody's celebrating. And we are feeling finally cross-functional because we are having the same dinner at that dinner. Now, in this respect, then the medicals are a little bit maybe in the contrary to the earlier phase when we are set to ask much more questions, we are as well set to share our science. So at that stage, you have your phase 3 data, you have your you should have approval and so on. So you are very proud on what we are doing, and you would like as well that this evidence is incorporated in the clinical practice. So that's where we are communicating maybe more than we are just listening in the previous phases. And that's where it's important, like maybe metric, share of scientific voice. I can imagine that most of you are, in the meantime, measuring. It pays off very much if you have the major phase 3 release of the data and you have it in the major congress. We have some experiences when we were measuring share of scientific voice on such congresses. You get very good pattern of how the evidence is resonating, how it is replicating in even social media with the digital key opinion leaders, and you can have a really very good feeling on how this message is resonating. As much more simpler is, of course, how much your evidence has been unsolicitedly referred in other third-party presentations.
And the last point on launch, the impact is on the clinical adoption. Are clinicians prescribing, using, recommending this new therapy? And of course, this is a little bit easier to measure because you can measure that pace of clinical adoption. And especially if medical has really done its job well before launch, then that pace should be quite quick because there's already a good understanding in the medical community on the value of these new therapies. But of course, in terms of metrics, we can measure that in terms of the uptake in the market, or even just general feedback from the MSLs in terms of how well valued these new therapies are perceived by the medical community. So those are some metrics that we can measure at the different phases of the life cycle. But often in medical, we have like KPIs that are very long term. And it's hard to say like done or not done because some things take like 3 years to achieve. So for example, something like achievement of inclusion of a drug in guidelines, that takes a long time. And sometimes you've got this management, executive management saying, medical, what's going on? It's been 2 years, we're still waiting. Is it done, not done? And it's not done yet. And then you feel a little bit reprimanded that you're not doing your job. So like, how do you show you're doing your job with something that takes so long? And one of the things we're implementing in Sanofi are metrics that are called progress to impact measurements. And you can use proxies to show to what extent you're moving the needle. So for example, a proxy to getting guidelines, a drug in the guidelines, is to what extent is the scientific community aligned on the need or the value of this product. So for example, you might think, if this was a year, if this is over time, maybe in January, there's only like 10% of the medical community who's aligned on the interest of this new therapy, still low awareness. So at that point, we can say, yeah, we're still very far from getting this into the guidelines. And then maybe we do a few medical education seminars, and now we're at 30%. Mid-year, we're at 50%. And by the end of the year, we're at 90%. So we still might say to the senior management, we don't have the guidelines yet, but we're very close because we've got 90% of our key experts aligned on the need of this on the need of this new therapy. So this is a nice proxy to show that you're moving the needle on those very long-term KPIs. So we're running towards the end of the presentation, so maybe we'll wrap it up here. Yeah. A couple of key takeaways. The first takeaway is demonstrate medical affairs value. And this is what the metrics are for. The metrics are really to show and showcase the value that medical affairs is bringing, show the impact that we're achieving, not just to have a dashboard to justify medical affairs existence within an organization. The second point is having that tailored approach. So each of you, with the different companies that you're representing, would have a different dashboard or different metrics that's important to you, depending on your life cycle, depending on your therapeutic areas, and of course, depending on the stakeholders that you're serving.
Then please think on diversifying metrics. while we are all on the search for the holy grail, meaning like what is this impact, outcome, qualitative metric which we can show, we are still searching for it, but please use some quantitative as well, because you will need them for steer the business as usual. And finally, keep it simple. And this is as well going along with this dashboard strategy. It would be really good to have a very simple 2 to 3 KPIs or metrics dashboard for your cross-functional discussions. And all of those 2 or 3 or whatever, 4 metrics should be actionable upon. So if you are showing this to your management, you need to know as well what I'm doing if those numbers are red or gray or whatever. Which does not mean that you should not have dashboards for yourself with a lot of other metrics which will help you to steer the business, but this is the main one. And with this respect, we say thank you.
And a slam dunk.
Yeah. Oh, we're time up. So I think the times is up. And there are people waiting, so if you want any, you want question? Lode has a question. No? Ah, no, sorry. Now, thank you. Questions we are taking at the bar.
Yeah, thank you.